Something just cracked open inside the Cleveland Browns building, and it wasn't supposed to be public. For months, the conversation around Shedeur Sanders has lived in whispers, inconsistent reps, mixed signals, a rookie quarterback caught between development and doubt. But now, that silence is gone, and the person who broke it isn't a talking head, a former player, or a fan with a microphone. It's the one coach who's seen everything up close. Behind closed doors, the Browns' quarterback room has been wrestling with a truth that's been uncomfortable to say out loud. Not about talent, not about effort, but about how Shedeur Sanders has been handled since the moment he arrived. And according to people inside the building, that conversation finally hit a breaking point. What's happening now isn't noise, it isn't spin, it's a shift. Film sessions have changed. Internal debates have shifted direction, and the tone surrounding Shedeur has gone from uncertainty to something far more dangerous for the status quo: clarity. The kind of clarity that forces organizations to confront whether they're actually developing quarterbacks or just pretending to. Because here's the thing, when a coach with decades of experience starts pointing to tape instead of talking points, narratives collapse fast. And once film backs it up, excuses disappear even faster. This isn't about crowning a savior. It's about asking why a quarterback showing advanced traits has been treated like a question mark instead of a project worth committing to. And if what's being said internally is true, then the Browns aren't facing a talent dilemma anymore. They're facing an accountability one. Because once the evaluation becomes honest, the next move defines everything that comes after. This didn't happen overnight, and it definitely didn't happen by accident. Inside the Browns building, the tone around Shedeur Sanders quietly started to change weeks ago. Not publicly, not in press conferences, but in rooms where opinions actually matter: film sessions, internal evaluations, closed-door conversations where excuses don't survive very long. According to people familiar with those discussions, Bill Musgrave's approach changed first. And that mattered because Musgrave isn't a hype coach. He doesn't deal in optimism for optimism's sake. When his messaging shifts, it's because the tape forces it to. What Musgrave reportedly began pushing wasn't emotional. It was technical: processing speed, pocket awareness, protection calls. The things casual fans don't track but defensive coordinators obsess over. And when those elements were isolated on film, one thing became hard to ignore: Shedeur wasn't playing like a typical rookie. That's where the discomfort crept in. Because if a quarterback is consistently making correct pre-snap adjustments, identifying pressure, and avoiding negative plays, then the conversation can't stay stuck on surface-level results. You can't keep saying, "He's not ready," when the tape shows he's already doing things that usually take years to develop. And that's when questions started flipping. Why were his first-team reps inconsistent? Why did momentum seem to stop every time efficiency improved? Why was rhythm allowed to build and then immediately interrupted? Those aren't fan questions. Those are coaching questions. What reportedly changed the room was when side-by-side practice data was pulled up. Completion rate, time to throw, sack avoidance, red zone execution. When Shedeur had extended reps with the starters, the numbers climbed. Every time, not marginally, noticeably. That made it impossible to keep pretending this was random. Once that pattern became undeniable, the conversation stopped being about whether Shedeur could play. It became about whether the Browns were actually setting him up to succeed. And that's a dangerous moment for any organization. Because once development becomes the focus instead of evaluation, you can't hide behind indecision anymore. You either commit, or you admit you don't trust your own process. That realization didn't explode publicly. But inside the building, it landed hard. And once it did, nothing stayed neutral after that. Here, where the story stopped being subjective. When the Browns put the tape on without agenda, certain things became impossible to unsee. Not highlight throws, not raw arm strength, but the small, professional details that separate playable quarterbacks from developmental guesses. Shedeur's feet told the story first. On multiple concepts, his footwork lined up with progression timing. Plant, gather, hitch, move. That sequencing matters because it dictates when and where the ball should come out. And according to internal evaluations, he wasn't drifting. He wasn't panicking. He was letting his feet guide his reads the way veteran quarterbacks are taught to do. That's not normal for a rookie. One play in particular kept coming up during breakdowns, a deep touchdown that didn't come from forcing the first read. Shedeur felt the front side route stalling, reset naturally, got to the backside window and delivered the ball in rhythm. No hesitation, no panic, just processing. Those are instincts you can't fake. And they showed up elsewhere too. Pre-snap checks, protection calls, subtle route adjustments when coverage leverage didn't line up. These weren't dramatic gestures. They were quiet corrections that prevented negative plays before they happened. That's why the "not ready" narrative started falling apart internally. Because readiness isn't about perfection, it's about problem solving. And Shedeur was solving problems in real time, often faster than expected. The film also highlighted something else that mattered: what he wasn't doing. He wasn't holding the ball unnecessarily. He wasn't forcing throws into dead looks. And he wasn't creating chaos for his offensive line by drifting into pressure. That matters in a system that struggled with protection. When pressure came, Shedeur adjusted. He reset protections. He trusted hot routes. He lived to play the next snap instead of chasing hero moments. Those choices don't show up on highlight reels, but they win trust inside buildings. Were there mistakes? Absolutely. Footwork lapses, occasional overaggression. But those mistakes were classified as correctable, not foundational. And that distinction changed everything. Because once a coaching staff agrees mistakes are fixable, the next question becomes unavoidable. If the quarterback is processing this well now, what happens when the system actually commits to him? That's where the narrative lost control, and where the Browns were forced to confront a truth they could no longer delay. This is where things got uncomfortable. Because once the film backed up Shedeur's processing and decision-making, the next issue couldn't be ignored anymore: opportunity. Or more accurately, the lack of consistent opportunity. Inside the building, one pattern kept repeating. Every time Shedeur was given extended first-team reps, his efficiency climbed, timing improved, chemistry showed up, decisions got faster, and just as momentum started to build, the reps were reduced again. That cycle stalled everything. Quarterbacks don't develop in flashes. They develop in rhythm. And rhythm only comes from repetition, seeing the same looks, working with the same receivers, feeling the same protection schemes over and over until reactions become instinctive. Interrupt that process, and even talented players start looking inconsistent. That's exactly what the internal data reflected. Practice charts reportedly showed clear spikes in completion rate, red zone execution, and sack avoidance when Shedeur worked with the starters for extended stretches. Not once, not twice, every time. And when those reps were pulled back, the numbers dipped again. That's not coincidence, that's cause and effect. At that point, the conversation shifted from evaluation to responsibility. Because if development stalls due to inconsistent reps, that's not on the quarterback, that's on the process. And once coaches start seeing that clearly, silence stops being an option. What made this harder to dismiss was that leadership wasn't an issue either. Receivers stayed late to work with him. Linemen communicated more clearly when he was running protections. The huddle didn't tighten up, it responded. Those are signs coaches take seriously. This wasn't about a rookie being overwhelmed. It was about a rookie being managed cautiously to the point of stagnation. And in the NFL, Cautious development often looks responsible until you realize it's actually slowing growth. That's why the internal tone shifted. Because once the reps issue became undeniable, the question stopped being, "Is he ready?" and became, "Why aren't we letting him get ready?" And that's a much harder question to dodge. Once that realization set in, the quarterback room dynamic changed almost immediately. Reps started feeling earned instead of rationed. Competition felt real instead of political. And clarity, real clarity, finally entered the conversation. But clarity has consequences. Because when opportunity aligns with performance, the organization no longer gets to hide behind uncertainty. And the next move would reveal whether Cleveland was ready to back up what the tape was already saying. Once the reps conversation cracked open, something else followed right behind it: leadership. And this part caught people off guard. Because the assumption from the outside was that Shedeur Sanders was still finding his voice, still learning how to command an NFL huddle, still growing into the role. That assumption didn't survive what coaches and players were actually seeing day to day. Inside the building, the feedback was consistent. Receivers responded to him, not just on Sundays but during the week, extra routes after practice, timing work on off days, quiet conversations about spacing and leverage that don't happen unless there's trust. Offensive linemen adjusted protections more decisively when he was under center, not because they were told to, but because communication was clearer. That matters more than arm strength ever will. Leadership at quarterback isn't about volume, it's about certainty. When players believe the person calling the cadence knows where the answers are, the entire offense settles. And according to multiple people around the team, that's exactly what started happening with Shedeur. What made this especially significant is that Musgrave didn't frame any of this emotionally. He framed it professionally. He made it clear this wasn't about liking a player or defending one. It was about what wins football games. And leadership wins games. When that message landed, the tone in the quarterback room shifted. Reps felt competitive instead of conditional. Preparation became more focused. And Shedeur, by all accounts, leaned into that clarity immediately. Earlier mornings, longer nights, louder presence in the huddle, not forced but natural. This wasn't a rookie demanding trust. This was a quarterback earning it. And once leadership stopped being a question mark, the remaining resistance started to feel thin. Because if a quarterback is processing well, handling pressure, avoiding negative plays, and commanding the room, then what exactly are you waiting for? That's when the conversation moved upstairs, from coaches to decision makers. Because at that point, this wasn't just about development anymore. It was about whether the Browns were willing to align their actions with what their own building was already telling them. This is where things stopped being just a coaching conversation. Once the tape, the reps' data, and the locker room feedback all lined up, the discussion moved out of the quarterback room and into executive territory. And that's a very different environment. That's where evaluation turns into accountability. Because at that level, the questions get sharper. Why wasn't demonstrated performance being rewarded consistently? Why did efficiency rise with opportunity, only for opportunity to disappear again? And most importantly, were internal grades actually matching the external narrative? According to people familiar with those discussions, that's when alignment started to matter. Analytics staff quietly supported what the coaches were seeing. Practice efficiency curves showed upward trends when Shedeur's repetition count increased. Turnover-worthy decisions dropped. Red zone processing improved. Time to throw stabilized. Those aren't opinions, those are measurements. What made this even harder to dismiss was how quickly momentum followed. When Shedeur's practice clips or game footage circulated, engagement spiked. Fan response shifted. Energy around the position changed. While business metrics don't dictate football decisions, they do confirm something important. belief was forming. And belief changes pressure. Once ownership and executives sense momentum, indecision becomes riskier than commitment. Because now, failing to act looks less like caution and more like mismanagement. That's when words like developmental misalignment reportedly entered internal conversations, not as blame, but as warning. The message was simple. You can't claim to be developing a quarterback while controlling his growth. You can't evaluate upside while limiting opportunity. And you can't preach patience while interrupting rhythm. At that point, the organization had to choose a direction. Commit fully, build intentionally, and live with the results. Or repeat the cycle Cleveland fans know all too well: mixed signals, stalled growth, and another reset disguised as prudence. According to insiders, that choice is already shaping offseason plans: expanded first-team reps, install packages tailored to Shedeur's strengths, faster tempo, clearer authority at the line. Because once an organization realizes it may have been slowing its own progress, the response can't be gradual. It has to be decisive. And for the first time in a long time, Cleveland appears ready to let clarity, not fear, drive what happens next. This is bigger than one quarterback. What's happening right now is a stress test for the entire Browns organization, not in terms of talent evaluation, but in whether they can actually follow through when their own evidence points in one direction. Because this is the exact fork in the road where franchises reveal who they really are. When development finally clicks, it doesn't inch forward, it accelerates. Quarterbacks don't improve in neat, linear steps, they make jumps. And according to people around the team, Shedeur is approaching one of those inflection points. The processing is there, the command is there, the leadership is there. What's left is alignment. That's why this matters so much internally. If Cleveland commits now, truly commits with consistent reps, a system built to his strengths, and a clear message of trust, they give themselves a real answer. Not a perfect one, a real one. And real answers are rare in this league. But if hesitation creeps back in, if opportunity starts getting rationed again, then this becomes something else entirely. Not a developmental curve, but a failure of process. And that kind of failure doesn't just cost games, it costs credibility. Coaches know it, executives know it, players definitely know it. You can't preach competition and then manage outcomes. You can't talk about development while interrupting it. And you can't build a quarterback without letting him on the offense long enough to grow into it. That's why people inside the building understand the stakes. This isn't just about whether Shedeur becomes the guy. It's about whether the Browns prove they're capable of developing any quarterback in a meaningful way. Because if this situation breaks down after the clarity that's already emerged, it sends a message far beyond Cleveland. The league notices patterns. And right now, Cleveland has a chance to change one. If they stay aligned, 2025 won't be remembered as the year of debate. It'll be remembered as the year development finally had direction. And if they do, then no amount of draft capital will fix what's actually broken. Because talent is Cleveland's biggest question anymore. Trust is. This is the moment where everything slows down, and clarity either holds or it collapses. For the first time in a long time, the Browns don't have the excuse of uncertainty. The tape has spoken. The data has backed it up. The locker room has responded. And a veteran coach with nothing to gain by stirring noise put his credibility on the line to say what needed to be said. That matters. Because when evaluation, opportunity, and leadership finally align, organizations don't get to pretend anymore. They either act on what they know, or they reveal that the problem was never the quarterback. What's unfolding now isn't about crowning Shedeur Sanders as a sure thing. It's about something far more important: whether Cleveland is capable of committing to a developmental process once it becomes obvious what the process requires. Consistency, trust, reps direction. If the Browns follow through, if they let Shedeur own the offense, grow through mistakes, and develop with intention, then 2025 becomes a real proving ground. Not just for him, but for the franchise itself. A chance to show the league that Cleveland can finally turn evaluation into execution. But if hesitation creeps back in, if opportunity gets rationed again, then this moment will be remembered differently. Not as a turning point, but as another warning ignored. Because quarterbacks don't fail in a vacuum. They fail when organizations talk about development, but don't commit to it when it's uncomfortable. Right now, the Browns are being given a rare gift: honesty inside their own building. What they do with it will define far more than one player's future. It will define whether Cleveland is finally ready to stop cycling through answers and start building one.